Good afternoon. I've been sitting here staring at this light in my face for the last half an hour. I look here and I see just shadows. So it's like the parable of the cave. Anyway, I'm going to be speaking about Martín Solares, and it was a very new name for me. As I'm a U.S. Latino critic, means I primarily look at the literature that is produced by English-speaking, English-writing Latino writers within the U.S. border. And every once in a while, we have not an exchange, but there's a little bit of a crossover. It's been slow either direction, that the literature of Mexico is translated into English. Maybe some of the bigger names, more familiar names, not even new territory comes to us from Mexico. So I'm intrigued whenever I get a name that came out of nowhere, not in my radar. And I'm thinking, well, what's the appeal behind this book? So I did a little bit of digging, and I have a kind of a theory about why this book is going to be an important crossover of Mexican literature into the U.S. and why it's going to be embraced by specifically the U.S. Latino readership and then beyond. So I'm the U.S. Latino critic. I'm going to look at it as that. Firstly, I like to claim that this is a border novel. U.S. Latino literature has a whole tradition of literature on the border. It talks about the problems of the border, the population, pollution, all these bleak stories. Every once in a while you get glimpses of the border as a thriving, beautiful landscape. But most of the time you get like the bleakness, right? And all of that is caused by the news reports that we get based on poverty, the femicides on the border, and most recently all of the immigration problems. A few days ago, as you may be familiar with, the Arizona issue in the State Bill 1070, which is caused, again, it keeps Mexicans and U.S. Latino literature bound to this conflicted dialogue border issues. What this book does is gives us a glimpse of the border issues on that side, on the other side, the Mexican side. How is it different than the U.S.? Well, that's what makes it so unique, so interesting, and so compelling to read. A little bit of background about Martín Solares and what are the two threads that you kind of need to be familiar with to really understand this novel. There are two timelines that he's working with. One is the early 70s, and then the more contemporary era after the year 2000, I believe. The early 70s of Mexico, Mexican history, known as the Ciabattari. Our president in Mexico was Luis Echevarria Alvarez. The reason that presidency marked even the contemporary climate in Mexico was that he's basically held as the person who really institutionalized corruption in Mexican politics and with the police. There are so many incredibly tragic stories associated with that presidency. And actually he's come under charges of genocide because of that, the actions that have been sanctioned during his presidency. That's still pending. Doubtful. It's very hard to bring such charges to some kind of a positive fruition for those that were affected by such a beast, such a monster. But during 1970, 1976, that's when Echevarria was the president of Mexico. Martín Solares was born in 1970, and he grew up seeing the changes in the way that the media treated these events. He also began to gain a consciousness of the kind of Mexico that was different before Echevarria. And even now, all you hear about the U.S. Mexico is corruption, right? During the President Felipe Calderon, the current president, there's been other kind of very alarming trends in the presence of the drug cartels. They're gaining power. You hear the news, right? Every time you hear news from Mexico, it's about the murders, it's about the decapitations. The kidnappings have risen 90% since the presidency of Felipe Calderon. So you see that these are the two periods that Martín Solares is dialoguing with in this novel. all that said, believe it or not, it's actually a very entertaining piece of literature. One of the reasons is that the narrative strategy behind this novel is that it begins with the death of a journalist. Nothing new, and on the global scale. I think in Mexico, in the last, since the year 2000, there have been about 42 journalists that have been killed. The death of a journalist begins this investigation to another event in the 1970s, which was an unsolved serial killer, the unsolved mystery of a serial killer. So these two mysteries kind of converge within this one policeman. So as the policeman, sort of given a very positive role, like the policeman is going to try to solve these two murders at once. But read the book. The translation, by the way, done by Austrian and John Hooker, is extraordinary. It's a beautiful, just beautifully done. And I say that with a bit of bittersweet, just because Austrian died tragically a few years ago, and such a wonderful talent as a translator and as a writer herself. The curiosity about this novel is that it defies easy categorization. It comes, I think that the critics in Mexico kind of like want to look at this novel as a tradition of the crime fiction, which is a very important genre in Mexican literature. But except that it's got these properties that kind of place it into another category that's also familiar in Mexican literature and in U.S. Latino literature, which is like the magical realism, right? But it's neither. It's both and it's neither. So any reader that comes at it as a book of crime fiction will be disappointed in the pacing of it, in the digressions of it. Any writer that comes at it looking at a magical realism novel will be disappointed at it because it is really grounded in such harsh realities of Mexican politics and Mexican culture. Right? So it's a hybrid form. And this hybrid form in Orlas and border theory is the only way that you can tell such stories that happen in the border. They are surreal narratives. They are narratives that are stranger in fiction. Right? And I think I read in an interview that Martín Solares had, before writing this novel, because it's not really his field. He's a critic. Has a journalistic background, but not a crime reporter. He wanted to create a kind of like he called it a tropical version of Chulika Police and Cold Blood. Right? He was interested in the crime